Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shepherd's Corner, having a conversation with Archbishop Charles Jason Gordon. And we're in this beautiful time in our Independence Week. Yes, it's the week of independence. And so he's having a conversation with us about a reflection of our watchwords. Good evening, Archbishop Charles Jason Gordon. How are you?
I'm doing really good, Reverend Deacon. Can't complain at all. Independence was beautiful. Very different from normal. No parades, no set of horses, no grandstand. But, it is an independence nonetheless.
We did, and I hope we didn't have any Zessa parties for independence, that everybody...
Well, I would hope not. I would certainly hope that no Catholics were involved if they did have.
I hope so too.
Good. So we live in hope.
We live in hope. A reflection on our watchwords. Now, my question is, what has COVID taught us about our nation, especially at this time?
Boy, we're living in these crazy kind of times. Huh? Unprecedented is a word that often comes to mind when we start to talk about these times in which we're living in. For the fourth time in our young history as a nation, we are approaching Independence Day in a state of emergency. Now that's something that I think should give us a pause and reflection on the nature and the health of our young republic. Because a state of emergency is really a last measure for every nation. And to approach independence in a state of emergency is really, that's quite something. And it's only 4 times that this has happened before. So, we have to pause. There's a sense in which, we've been brought to a state of emergency by a microbe. You know that little microbe that you can't even see? That little guy?
Mm-hmm.
That little fella. You can't see him, but he brought us to our knees. He's brought us to a state of emergency. And that is, the microbe seems to be more resilient than us. It's mutating constantly to become more deadly. It's more infectious than it was before. It's everything in the wrong direction this microbe is doing. This little microbe has brought us to our knees. I think that's the absolute truth here. That as big, as mighty, as strong, as resilient, as whatever else we want to say we are, a little microbe has us and the whole world on our knees. Because we can't do things the way we used to do it before. The thing is, this microbe is indiscriminate on us. Huh? It's killing wild. And anybody, it really don't care if you're rich, if you're poor, if you're zessen, if you're not zessen, if you're educated, if you're uneducated, if you're black, you're Indian or you're white, if you're male or you're female, if you're Trinidadian or Tobagonian, if you're urban or you're rural, the microbe don't care. It's indiscriminate. There's only one discrimination the microbe has.
Yeah, what's that? If
you're vaccinated or if you're not vaccinated.
Vaccinated. I am vaccinated.
That's the only discrimination that this microbe seems to have. But it's hitting in the most amazing way. It reaches to us, it's lethal in its attack. And it really creates a question. We call a state of emergency for microbe. Now I want you to think about it. You can't see it. You can't see it. But we call a state of emergency because of it. Now, isn't this a little bit surreal?
Yeah.
We as a nation have called a state of emergency because of this microbe. The eye can't see it, but we've called a state of emergency because of it. And it's important to reflect on this, because how do you fight an enemy that you cannot see? An enemy that really, no matter what you do, it's just not available.
Yeah.
You can't engage it in a hand-to-hand combat. You can't send a drone behind him. You can't wage a war against the microbe. Well, I suppose you could wage a war. Social distance.
Social distance. Wash your hands, put on your mask, and vaccinate. I want to add one more.
That's how you wash. That's how you wage your war. Those are the only bits of ammunition in the war that make any sense whatsoever. So what we have now is that this enemy that we cannot see is exploiting all of our shortcomings and using our shortcomings against us, which I find amazing. And every weakness to invade our bodies and the body of the citizens and causes great sickness amongst us. Wherever it can, it creates death. The microbe is really lethal as an enemy, and it's really wreaking havoc amongst us. And that's what how we've come to Independence Day today. Because many businesses have been closed because of COVID, because of the microbe. And now many businesses are not going to reopen. That means many jobs have been lost. Many people who before this pandemic were living a decent life, supporting themselves, owning their cars, living and educating and doing all the things that they were doing. And now they're in trouble because the employment has shrunk, because businesses have just not been able, a lot of small businesses have not opened back up.
We're also seeing a couple of things, and it's coming out of when I do some research and what the business community is saying. The cost of shipping has gone right up. So therefore, the cost of goods coming into the country has also increased.
Sky high. People who are shipping a container from China for a couple thousand US, has gone up twice and sometimes 3 times, which means that the cost of the goods have gone up significantly also.
And also some of the commodities, food, grain, processed foods, what we've also seen is that a lot of countries are holding that back for their own population.
All right.
And therefore, we're not getting the foods that in most cases people need to survive.
Yeah.
Or you have to pay more for it. So the price has also gone up.
Yeah. So scarce resources in terms of jobs and price hikes, and therefore disposable income is not really keeping up with the cost of living. So I would say, all in all, the picture is not that great. And I'll just add one more thing, that, the increase in poverty has been dramatic, but the liquidity in the country has been falling by around $1 billion a month since January.
Wow.
So what they call the liquidity is all the excess cash that individuals have in their bank accounts that is there in the economy as buffer for other things, that if you had whatever you had before, now you have a significant portion less. Because if you dropping liquidity by $1 billion a month, and it started off, I think it started January around $12 billion, then you're getting into a place where the savings left going to be into the hands of a few people, and most people just not going to have what they need to survive this next time. So part of what we're doing is we're burning the liquidity to support the lifestyle. That's not a great thing, but it's something we have to continually deal with.
So my question is, What is the real threat? Is it the microbe or what?
I would say the threat is not the microbe, you know.
Not the microbe?
Not the real threat. The microbe is a threat, but it's not the real threat. For me, the microbe is not the real threat. If the microbe was the real threat, we would have brought it down to its knees by now. We'd have wrestled it down to the ground by now. The fact that we cannot wrestle it down to the ground says that there's something that's allowing the microbe to do its business. And whatever that something is, we have not been able to stand between the microbe and that thing. And so the real threat to our nation, I believe, is the weaknesses that have existed in our democracy before COVID-19. That these weaknesses have been blown up and become much, much bigger because we have just fed them and continually did that. Just consider, despite all the science that we know and that has been communicated, the young, rich, and poor people, gated communities, and ZESA parties have acted against common good, common sense, refusing to adjust their lifestyle for the sake of the health of their parents, their grandparents, the nation as a whole. How could the microbe be the problem when we're making bad choices constantly, putting ourselves in harm's way? And then when we get COVID, we say, oh gosh, we get COVID. And then when we die, we say, oh, poor me. Poor me what? Poor me, oh Lord. Poor me. Why me? Well, why me? Because we have to work. Why me? Because, COVID is going to be a killer no matter what you do. But if we were able to safeguard ourselves better and more, then whatever COVID does would not have us on our knees the way it has us on our knees right now. For the last couple of weeks, we've been hovering around just under 300 new cases a day. A day, 300 new cases? Really? That's not a lot of new cases.
But I want to jump in here. I want to jump in. That's 300 reported cases. There may be people who are asymptomatic and they don't even know they have COVID.
Correct.
So this is people who went and took a PCR test. And remember, a lot of people are asymptomatic, so they're walking around with this microbe and they don't know. So it might be a lot higher in terms of actual people who have COVID and are transmitting it. That, to me, is a big thing.
Yes. And that's the old COVID. That's not the Brazilian strain or the Delta strain. When they come, that's different. That's a whole other part. But because that's twice as or 3 times as infectious as original COVID. But put that aside, it cannot do what it is doing if we are not complicit in its actions. That's my point. So who's your real threat?
It has to be us. It has to be our indiscipline. It has to be our lack of thinking of the other that is putting the pressure on all of us. Yes. Putting the pressure on ourselves, putting the pressure on our parents and the economy.
Correct. And that's why I'm proposing that, maybe the microbe is not the real threat. Maybe there's a threat that is more real than the microbe. The microbe is the microbe. It does what it does. It has no human thinking. It is going to act the way it's going to act. But we are human beings and we can act differently. And maybe this independence is a time where we could be offered the opportunity to act and think differently.
You know what you're saying here is that the microbe is smarter than we are. You realize that what you're saying? Because we are the ones here who are not adjusting to the environment or what is happening. But guess what? The microbe is mutating.
Constantly adjusting, constantly updating, constantly getting the thing on. That's it. So we are the real threat, not the microbe. We are the real threat. The microbe is doing what the microbe does. We are the real threat. If we're going to move forward, then we have to understand who we are and why, and also what is propelling us to the next stage and what that looks like. So I would say that, you know, our not doing what we're supposed to do, call it indiscipline, that's a real threat. That is a real threat. If we did everything we were supposed to do, you can't have 300 and something cases a day.
But I see you highlighting in your article, people grab your Catholic news. You know, we have a special, you know, and you spoke about the microbe created a new wave in Easter of 2021. You kicked that off, right? It created a new wave in Easter of 2020.
You see, the microbe is going to mutate, it's going to do everything it can to feed on us. We have to make sure that we stop it. And once you look and you see 300 new cases a day, every day, in a most religious manner, then you have to say to yourself, okay, why is it keep going? Well, because we're not doing what we're supposed to. In discipline. Indiscipline, I think, is the name of the game. I think that that's what is wrong. And I think that's the real enemy. Our indiscipline. That's the real enemy. Because if we were more disciplined, I think the numbers would not be where they are right now. They would have come straight up.
But there's an independent show. You realize that? And you know, we have watchwords for our nation.
Absolutely.
And you saw, and one of our watchwords is discipline. So what is that saying about us?
Well, you see, Dr. Eric Williams, our first Prime Minister, addressing the Independent Youth Rally on August 30th, 1962, he gave the nation these watchwords: discipline, production, and tolerance. And he had a speech that day. So this is the eve of independence. He's speaking to the young people of the nation, the school-age children of the nation. And he made some important points that day in that talk about us as a young republic, or at that stage as a young nation, and what we have to look at and why, and what it is we need to reckon with if we're going to move this thing forward. And so what he came up with is these watchwords that are reminders for us of the kind of nation we want to become. We become a people who are pretty much disposable, pretty much use and abuse and dispose of, pretty much, you know, me and my thing, and it's all about me, all of those places. But it is possible also to live as a person in this time and live for the other, and live with some discipline, and put the common good first, and learn how to love and live and to leave legacy, and to thank God for all the incredible graces we've received, and to become a better person as we put God more and more squarely first in our life.
You see, you quoted, you said, discipline is both individual and national. And the individual cannot be allowed to seek his personal interests and gratify his personal ambitions at the expense of a nation. Have we been doing that?
Well, you tell me. Busy man out and about.
It's a party after it's a party. Fellas don't want to cover their face. You know, fellas, you know.
Have we ever done that?
You know, and you have these challenges here. So it must tell us something about what he saw in 1962 when he came up with these watchwords: friends, nation, These are our watchwords, and we have to
Correct.
hold them sacred. Discipline,
Correct.
tolerance, and production. He must have seen something.
Yeah. You know, I think he says the individual discipline is both individual and national. The individual cannot be allowed to seek his personal interests and gratify his personal ambitions at the expense of the nation. So there we see the discipline is about putting the nation first. We would call it the common good in the Catholic tradition, putting the common good first, and once we have the common good first, then my individual good follows the best way it can. But first is the common good. Second is my individual good, which is different from right now. It's all about my individual good, all about it, and we could, wherever we want, that's what we want, and if the place mash up, that's how the place will have to be. But there's something wrong with that. Something very, very wrong with it. We need to own this as a malady from God and humanity that has afflicted us in a blindness where we're not seeing the truth of what we're doing. And that is really the piece of crazy.
But I want to take us back. You say this is a 59-year-old nation, okay? So if this is a 59-year-old nation, how did we drop the ball? Because it would have been the elderly ones who are what we would call the elderly statesmen right now, who would have dropped the ball in terms of not instilling discipline in the youth, because it was the youth of the nation, guys with the book bags, when Dr. Eric Williams on the eve of independence said this, right? All these, let's just say they were 10 years old or whatever, right? That makes them around 69 at this point in time.
Right.
Where did they fail us? Where did they fail us as a nation? Where did these leaders fail us as a nation? Because they heard him. They had the responsibility of ensuring that we educate our people, we help our people learn a certain aspect of discipline.
You know, it's not the lack of money. We've had more money than we needed.
Right. It's
not a lack of bright people. We've had an amazing amount of bright people run through this country. Amazing amount. It's not raw talent. We've had a lot of people who have been bright and who have done what they've had to do, but they would have become a different thing. So and contributed in their own way to the country. So it's not on any of those levels. I actually believe the big gap where we have failed is the failure to cultivate the notions like the common good, like notions like putting the other before myself, the understanding of Ubuntu, I am because we are, and really have a different ethic of life than the one we have right now, where it's all about me, and if it's not about me, well, it's about nobody. I go mash it up. And so we have to find a way of seeing that puts values and virtues at the very foundation of civic life, of national life, because that's the only thing is going to help us to move forward from here.
In your article, you said, we've raised a generation who know their rights. We have not taught them their responsibility to the common good. And for this common good, for all of us to flourish, we need to give up some of our rights for the sake of the good. And you reference the compendium for social doctrine 164 to 167.
Yep. You see, unless you understand that in the Catholic tradition, we have this teaching of the common good, which is the good of the collectivity, which is above the individual good, which is the good of the individual. So it might be pleasing to you or displeasing to you, but that's irrelevant. Irrelevant is are you acting for yourself, or are you acting for the good of the whole collectivity? Like you have started off, you know, in this whole journey of COVID and the funerals that you have done and all these things must have made you sober and ask, you know, yourself, okay, how do people reach to this? Yeah.
And you know, the challenges, you know, and not only that too, oh my goodness, you know, when you've seen, and I've done a number of funerals, a number of COVID people who've died, you know, middle-aged and elderly people who have died. And let me just say this to everybody outside there, none of them were vaccinated, right? And they all got COVID through whatever reason, you know, but the microbe reached them. For the majority, they were suffering from comorbidities. And the minute they reached ICU, we knew that there was a challenge. And these are mothers, these are fathers, these are grandparents of people, right? And why did we have to reach to this? Because I remember in 2020, you know, early in 2020, it looked like we had everything under control, but some things happened along the way.
What do you think happened?
I put it down to indiscipline. I really put it down to indiscipline. I don't know if we became too relaxed. In your article, you mentioned you mentioned a couple incidents that we have to look seriously at. You know, this wasn't in your article, but I will throw this. You know, hey, we closing the beaches, but it's not gonna come effective. It doesn't come into effect until Monday. So guess what?
Everybody,
Saturday, Sunday, everybody
took a guy. Everybody gone to the beach.
Easter, elections, you know, and what did we see coming out of all of these things? And regardless of what the political people want to say,
the
evidence is there. The evidence is there.
Trade spike up. So we in this twilight zone where we're facing the enemy. The enemy is brutal, and we are being indisciplined in our responses. I think if the enemy was shooting real bullets from a real gun somewhere, people would have figured out, gosh, we better do the safe thing. We understood Ubuntu years ago, you know. We'd call it Gaia. Somebody had house repairs to do. Everybody bring their little toolkit. Everybody come contribute, and on a Sunday, we fix up whatever had to happen. Somebody's house burned, tutus, everybody put together, and Gaia, the new house would go up, and you know, there would be somebody would be cooking a pot of food, somebody would be passing the nails, somebody would be doing this and that, but the whole village comes together to work together. The individual is dependent upon the collective and has to give up something of his or her rights to ensure the good of the whole. And that concept we're missing right now. So in the Western world, we are fiercely guarding all of our rights, but we're not asking ourselves about our responsibilities. That's where the problem is. You know, somebody said America has a statue of liberty, and that's the problem.
Why is that a problem?
Because if you only have a statue of liberty, on the other coast, they should have had a statue of responsibility. Because liberty and responsibility always have to go hand in hand. And if all you do is you stress your liberty, then you don't stress the responsibility, then it becomes very I-centered. And then we, the collectivity, is missed out. And that's part of the challenge that we're facing in Trinidad and Tobago today. That we're not putting us first, we're putting myself first, even if that means that we are put into some danger. As an example, you know, eating a KFC, walking down the road, have finished eating it.
Are you sure the boxer decided to do it?
I didn't say that. We wouldn't do that.
We wouldn't.
We wouldn't do that because we, Trinidad and Tobago, will always put the other citizen who would have to see that garbage before myself and the ease of disposing the garbage. You understand me now?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, throwing the box on the ground says, I only care about me. I don't care about the next person who have to walk past here and see garbage on the ground. I don't care about the person who have to clean up here and have to pick up after me. And Ubuntu is already, I think, a very powerful thing. Whether we speak about what is necessary to prevent the spread of the virus or taking the vaccine to prevent its spread, our indiscipline is a national challenge that I think threatens every single one of us. And when Dr. Williams, on that night before independence, used discipline as a national watchword, I think he hit it right on. I think he hit it right on.
He was speaking to a fledgling nation and recognized these were critical watchwords for the people that he knew that he was part of.
Correct. Discipline is his first watchword. And the reason why the microbe has gotten us to our knees is because of the indiscipline in our nation. I think that is as objective a fact as we can say. Because if we still having Zesta parties and we still not wearing our masks and we still not social distancing and we still breaking all protocols, when we see how bad things are, then we have to ask ourselves why. Because my freedom is more important than your health. Well, production is our second one, you know. That's the second watchword. And here Dr. Williams says, we must produce in order to enjoy. Wealth does not drop from the sky for any individual or any nation. Reduce production, skylark on the job, take twice as long to do a job and make it cost twice as much. Do any of these things and in effect, you reduce the total amount available to be shared among the total number of people. Isn't that something else?
Yeah. We must produce in order to enjoy. That is a serious nail there. Wealth does not drop from the sky for any individual or any nation. And if we reduce production, if we skylark on the job and you know trainees.
And now say here did you do with skylark?
It was a long time. It's a long time.
In a national speech from the first Prime Minister. If you skylark on the job, take twice as long to do a job, make it cost twice as much, do any of these things, and in effect, you reduce the total amount available to be shared among the total number of people in the nation.
Now, you are quoting from our Prime Minister.
Straight quote from Dr. Eric Williams. Straight quotation.
I'm worried because it looks like everything he said, we decided not to do.
And that's why I'm proposing that the greatest threat to the nation is not the microbe. The microbe is exposing the greatest threat to the nation. The indiscipline, the lack of production. Now, when we open back up, and as things open up more and more and more, and people are going to be hungry for jobs. Who's going to get the jobs? Not the skylarkers. When we have to work and figure out how to rebuild this country, you know, a lot of the people who are going to be left on the margins are the people who were not the best workers in their companies before. And for better or for worse, every one of us has to find a way that we can contribute to the rebuilding of this country post-pandemic. We just have to find a way. And so that's why this one is so important. Having had the economies closed, it's 120 something days that the churches are closed this time. Yeah. 120 something days. It was 90, now 120 something. That is really a serious business. But when we have been closed as long as we have been, if when we open back, there is no push at production, then there will be no push at income. Then there will be no push at getting us going as a nation. Then too many people are going to be falling off the cliff of poverty. That's the problem.
I see this, Archbishop J, as pressing the reset button. I'm glad that your article is or says a reflection of our watchwords, because I think we need to reboot. You know, in information technology words, we need a reboot right now, a reset, to kind of, let's look at ourselves again. And it is wonderful that you should be using the words of our first Prime Minister for us to really look at, because I think it's critical. And I want to thank you for this article because I think it's time.
So if we take the production, you know, we have had about 5 decades where our lifestyle was not dependent on our production. Think about it. How we produce was not how we lived. The oil and gas money supplemented everything, because whether you like it or you didn't like it, your electricity is being supplemented even now. Gas was being supplemented. Whole lots of things were being supplemented. Your taxes have been supplemented by the oil revenues. Because if not for the oil revenues, where else the government would have got raise the money to do what it needed to do? So your whole lifestyle has been supplemented by oil revenue. So we really have not had to produce at the level of excellence to be able to enjoy a lifestyle that has been phenomenal. And that's a major problem. They call it the Dutch disease, they call it many things. But that's a major problem, because we have become very accustomed to being skylark on the production line. And regardless of what type of job you're working at, once that lackadaisical kind of attitude steps in, it means that we are really in deep challenge, because we are just having a merry life without having to be stretched to be excellent in our production. But here's the thing. That's why I'm saying the microbe is not our greatest threat. I know people going to want to hang me, quarter me, and try me, but the microbe is not the greatest threat. The microbe is displaying what the greatest threat is, which is our indiscipline, our lack of production, and our lack of tolerance. And that's where the microbe is exposing the inadequacy of ourselves as a young nation. And that's what we have to watch and guard against. Because with this pandemic that we have now, you know, the whole capacity to produce with oil prices down, we're going to have to work a lot harder now to enjoy the same lifestyle we used to get easily before. And that working harder is going to require us to produce at a whole other level than we've had to do before, because the oil subsidies have been really good for our citizens and held up. Now that is not going to be functioning as large a part of the budget as before, unless something significant happens, now you understand where the productivity has to change, and we have to now really invest a lot more in our productivity. Because if you're manufacturing, you can't produce an item, to go back to Dr. Williams' point, that if the labor cost was supposed to be $5 and the item was selling for $8, and you have double the labor costs from $5 to $10, they cannot sell that item and make a profit, because now you have eaten away the profit by increasing your labor costs, by your lack of productivity. And we don't understand, when we don't do what we're supposed to do on the job, it really is an indictment to everybody, because it really raises the cost of everything. And that's where we have a challenge again in our country. So each citizen has to do their part in being productive and contributing to the rebuilding of this nation.
You said in your article, you said the great threat to the stability of our nation are the pockets of poverty that have gotten worse. You know, and you kicked on saying, while business owners and workers have all taken a significant economic hit, we still have to protect our workers during this period of great uncertainty. I hope that hits home with me as a business owner, right? And I see it every day, because as a business owner, I recognize that there are pockets of poverty that have really gotten worse. They aren't able to be able to afford to do certain things, right? And it's the bare necessities, you know. And this is where,
and like us, the church, we've been closed now for 90 days, 120 days. That's 200 days we've been closed, since last year, March. But we've had to carry our people, even those that can't work remotely. So that's been a real challenge. But when we come back, if people now have bad habits of not working and therefore become unproductive, and therefore what used to take 2 days now takes 5 days, is not what we've lost, is not just the 200 days. It will be 200 more days within the next 2 years, unless we raise the productivity. We raise the productivity and understand that I am because we are Ubuntu. On the other hand, if the worker does not get vaccinated to ensure safety for all in the workplace, that individual is jeopardizing the health of other workers and the customers, the stability of the business and the national economy. And this is again where we have to put the common good first. So that if somebody says, well, I'm not vaccinating, well, that will create a challenge within the workplace, but it will, and uncertainty for other workers. And it would create, you know, an ongoing pandemic, because we can't open up as we need to all sectors.
And we have to think of also education of the children, because here we have a big challenge. It looks like, as we speak now, that there's going to be more virtual learning, and only some of students are going to be able to go back to schools. I was looking at the stats on those who took the Pfizer, you know, at least those who are 12, the teenagers and upwards, and still we've not hit the mark that we needed. So you have, again, a big challenge of these people, or these young people who need that social interaction and that ability to learn socially. They are going to be deprived of school too, on top of that.
Again. And what does that do for the future generations of kids who have been out of school now and might be out of school as much as 2 or 2.5 or 3 years? And how do you ever re-socialize those children? And how do you get them back into a school system? If they are 13 or 14 right now, 3 years, that's 16 or 17, you're not getting them back. And what's it cost to the country for that long term? But why? And this is why the discipline and the production is so important that we make the first thing not what I want, but what's good for the common good and what's good for the nation as a whole. That's how I would say.
Ubuntu.
Ubuntu.
Tolerance.
Well, here's what Dr. Williams said to the youth, and I love it, you know. You in your schools have, like the nation in general, only two alternatives. You can learn to live together in peace, or you fight it out and destroy one another. The second alternative makes no sense and is sheer barbarism. The first alternative is civilized and is simple common sense. You, the children, yours is a great responsibility to educate your parents, teach them to live together in harmony. Those young people that he was speaking to then, those are the elders of our nation today. So if they were 13 and 15 years old then, they're 63 and 65 years old today. Whatever age they were, no, they're 70-something years old today. So whatever, who they were, who was their God that I don't know, but those people would be in the mid to late 70s today, I would imagine. And what he says is so profound. You only have two alternatives. Learn to live together in peace or fight it out and destroy one another. He said, you children, like the whole nation, these are alternatives. So we better learn some tolerance. And here's where I see the greatest challenge that we're facing. It's not the micro. It's what I would call a virtue ethic.
A virtue ethic?
A virtue ethic. That's what I would say the greatest challenge is. You see, Aristotle taught that if you want to know what the good is, look at the good man. You want to know what virtue is? Look at the virtuous man. You want to know what honor is? Look for the honorable man. Virtue comes from cultivating habits of doing the right thing because it's the right thing, regardless of who's seeing. And this cultivation of habits of excellence and virtue is really the foundation that brings about a nation of discipline, of high production, and of tolerance. So if you want to have discipline, production, and tolerance, you have to have virtue in the citizenry. When the citizenry reaches to, I think, I feel, and I like, and therefore I act however I want to act, then that is a thing that you have to guard against. And guarding against that is really what we absolutely have to do. So without a virtue ethic, there will be no way forward for our country. Because what we've descended into is a form of barbarism that is really creating a stage of war where there should be no war. And that barbarism is really what is getting to us right now. And so if you listen to social media, if you listen to the talk shows on the radio, you see that lack of prudence, that lack of patience, that lack of respect for one another. That's really and truly a lack of virtue. And without virtue, we're not going to have a way of rebuilding our nation and coming to a better place than the place where we are now. Because without virtue, if I don't like you, I mash you up. I say anything about you, true or not true, it don't matter, you know. Because I don't like you, I could say anything I want. That's a lack of virtue. And the lack of virtue is creating a lot of noise in this little house we have. And making it really hard to hold peace within this little house we have. I don't know how we're moving forward without building virtue into the curriculum of every one of our schools, and without teaching our young people virtue and how to live the virtuous life.
Tolerance. Tolerance. This is a big key. You know, and I struggle, and I'm saying, you know, in it I see some hope with young people. I'm seeing the young people, they are more tolerant than the elderly people, those of the 1962 era, the 70s and so on, and the 80s era. But still, a lot of them are in power. So therefore, there's this pushback against the younger ones who are saying, listen, you know, we're going to universities together, we're partying together, we're playing cricket, football, and socializing together. So, daddy, mommy, I'm kind of hearing you, but I'm not hearing you because I don't follow that kind of ethic that you're pushing.
But
you know,
you see, during this election,
yeah,
and during the electioneering, racism and intolerance was heightened. It became, I would say, an epidemic that was more lethal than the microbe itself. Now, racial intolerance in our nation, I think, is the real enemy, because it means that if the government happens to be East Indian, half the population vex and not cooperated. If the government happens to be African, half the population vex and not cooperated. So that is bad production, that's total indiscipline, and very little tolerance, if no tolerance at all. And that's where we have to see this. You know, there was a young guy on TikTok who's in the height of this whole racial thing, who says, I don't get this, you know. We listening to each other music, we eating each other food, we liming together with each other, we wearing each other clothes. I don't get what this racism thing is. And for the younger generation, it was really abhorrent, and it ought to be for every citizen. But we were carrying it on and promoting it. And this is the tolerance that the Prime Minister spoke to, that if we can either work together and build up this house with discipline and high productivity, or we could mash up this house, but that's an act of barbarism. And sometimes it looks to me like we would prefer to mash up this house than work together and build it up. And the thing is, when you mash up the house, who is going to be affected? And that's where I come back to Ubuntu. I am because we are. And we have to be important, more important than I. And therefore, I might want to mash up the house, but for the sake of the we, I have to be tolerant. And I have to find another solution to this thing. And that is really the big challenge that I think that we are facing right now. And that's why you ask me, what's the real challenge? No, the real challenge is not the microbe. It is the lack of virtue in the heart of the citizen that has been able to get away for decades upon decades with, I think, I feel alike and therefore I act. And that action, divorced from virtue, has created the real moral pandemic that is killing our nation.
You said the enemy lives in our hearts and minds and plays havoc with us, ensuring we never have harmony in sweet TNT. And if we want to become a nation we are destined to become, we need to stop the racism now. You know, and so many people like me have so many of the different races in it. I struggle sometimes to understand why.
Listen, if they have a repatriation, I think I go into the four corners of the universe and piece of me staying here. Because piece of me is First Nation.
Yeah. So,
piece of me is First Nation. Piece of me is African. Piece of me is in East India. Piece of me is European. If they have repatriation, they had to cut me up, quarter me out, and send me to the four corners of the universe. Because many people living in the country who look like pure anything are also mixed something. And okay, but put that one aside. You know, many years ago, I attended a 1-month leadership seminar in Washington. And we had an exercise that we're doing. We had one group, we're being asked to perform a simple task. The group failed miserably and was fired. It was 12 people line up and they had to move a piece of PVC to the ground without losing contact with the PVC. There's about 40-something of us in the group. Everybody who was not doing the job was shouting at them, but what is wrong with you? Just do the thing. Okay, so they get fired, summary. So the facilitator said, all right, clearly we had this bunch of guys who were not that good. Let's get the crack team. Everybody who was raising their hand and think you could do better, raise your hand. So everybody who raised their hand, they put them there to do the job. Guess what?
What?
Same effect.
Everybody get fired?
Same effect. The second group who knew what to do better than the people who was doing it were as bad or worse than the first group.
Wait. Oh, everybody watched what was going on?
Yeah, all of us in the one room, you know.
All of us, you are two different teams.
No. Everybody is about 40-something people.
Yeah.
We're all in the room. So the first group of 12 did the exercise, they failed. Yeah. The second group who was shouting the loudest at the first group, they failed.
Yeah.
And then the instructor said, let me tell you something. This is a very simple lesson. If you observe behavior in any organization and you fire a group of people and you hire a new crew and they become as bad as the first group, the problem is not with human beings. The problem is with the structures, the problem is with the systems, and the problem is with the processes. Because if you have the wrong structures, you have the wrong systems, you have the wrong processes, you will turn an A group into a Z group very quick. Very, very quick. And that's where I want to go. That the enemy, it lives in us, but it lives in the inadequate structures that we have. In our last election, you know, the ruling party got 49% of the votes and it governs 100% of the citizens. Something is wrong with the first past the post system. Something is wrong with it. This has been made clear in the pandemic, as it's been made clear for a long time before this. When the government's job is to govern and the opposition's job is to oppose, and these two are divided by race, we have a lethal cocktail. The voter in our electoral districts, we know are cast along the lines of racial composition directly. I have a friend who does statistics. He took all the EDs, checked only one thing. Was the ethnicity in the ED? And if it was 32% East Indian, and let's say 25% African, then when you ran the results, guess what? However the ethnicity was, so the votes flowed. Now that's dangerous.
Yeah.
So when you have that composition in the electoral district, then a first past the post means that a large part of the population is always going to be underrepresented, no matter what you do. And when that large part is not an ideological difference, but a racial difference that you could actually see, that creates havoc in a country like ours. So the voters really are being left in this thing. And I think that we've come to a place where we have to have the courage to say that our democracy needs to evolve. That if we want to earn a place among the nations of the world, we need a system of democracy that allows the brightest, the best to work together to build a better Trinidad and Tobago, where every creed, every race has an equal place. And that means we have to evolve the system by which we choose who leads this country. And there are many systems around the world that have been tried and tested to be better than what we're doing. But everybody looking for their 5 years in the sun, so nobody is willing to give up something for the sake of a Trinidad and Tobago in the future that would be more stable than what we have right now. And without the discipline, without the productivity, without the tolerance, and in other words, without the virtue, we will ruin the country if we don't evolve the thing. And that's where Dr. Williams' words were so potent, that we have to see either we mash up this house or we learn to live together in harmony. I'm preferring that we try our best. That requires virtue. Here how he concludes. I call upon all of you, young people, to practice what you sing together today and tomorrow, to translate the idea of our national anthem into a code of everyday behavior, and to make our nation one in which every creed and race finds an equal place. And I would like to add, and may God bless our nation.
Thank you, Archbishop G. What's your key message on this conversation with you?
The microbe has unearthed our real weakness as a nation: indiscipline, lack of production, lack of tolerance.
So what are we going to do? What is your action step for all of us?
Reflect on our nation's watchwords. And ask yourself, what step can you take to grow a little more discipline, to be better in your productivity, and to be more tolerant as a human person? The scripture reading, Romans 12:4-8, which is the whole analogy of the body. We are all interconnected in this one body that we call the body of Christ.